There we go. We are live. All right. It's begun. Matthew Rosenberg, welcome to Word Balloon. It's great to see you, man.
It's good to see you. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. And I'm glad to see you. Am I right? When Diamond resumes, May 20th, that'll be the next issue of Hawkeye Freefall? Or have you been pushed back?
No. Well, this is just being explained to me today. It's that is May 20th is when Diamond resumes, but we won't be in Diamond. It's going to be digital only.
Oh, okay. All right.
So you're reading the book online, apparently, is what they're telling me.
All right, and eventually the paper issue will come later, I'm assuming?
I'm hoping.
All right, there we go.
They said it'll definitely be a trade, but I don't know about paper issue.
Was this going to be the last issue coming up?
No, 6 is the last. So there's 2 more
6
that will definitely be digital, and then maybe the trade, although maybe paper. I don't know yet.
Interesting. Okay, man. I understand.
It's a brave new world.
Yeah, weird time, man. Exactly, and we'll see how things shake out. I understand. It's a great story. I mean, we talked at the beginning of it, and you know, you were kind enough to give me the first issue, and it's Hawkeye versus the Hood, and he's assembled his own team of of people to help. Yeah. And I love the combination of people, and especially always happy to see John Walker back.
Yeah. John Walker is I mean, I'm a huge fan of that Mark Grunewald era of Cap. Like, I think people don't pay enough attention to like the amount of great characters he created, and so U.S. Agent is definitely one that I'm happy to, throw in wherever I can. So
sure, he's a great character. He's conservative Cap, and and kind of a perfect foil for Clint.
Yeah. I think they're fun. They're fun together. I mean, like at this point, U.S. Agent I think is a sort of a fun foil for like so many characters in the Marvel universe. I'm hoping to do more with him, just because he's in some ways such an outsider from the rest of them. But like, it weighs on him heavily, and some of it is his own choices, and some of it is other things. And I think there's just a lot of interesting stuff there. I think he's just a great character who I'm hoping to shine more of a spotlight on going forward.
That's awesome. I also, again, let's see. So you got Mockingbird with him, Winter Soldier and Falcon, Walker, D-Man. Always good to see D-Man.
D-Man shows up. Night Thrasher. D-Man, once I'm into the Grunewald Cap characters, D-Man's going to be there too, because he's just such a good character.
And I just love how he just immediately has to hug Clint and everything and smother him. Like, good to see you, man.
He's rereading those issues, those old Grunewald Cap issues. Like the thing I love about it is like you have Nomad and D-Man as these characters who are just like these perfect counterbalance, where Nomad is like Captain America but turned sort of like cynical and nihilistic, and D-Man is the most sort of effervescent, enthusiastic superhero. And I'm like, we don't have a lot of those anymore. We don't have a lot of guys who are like, this is fun, I love doing this, like I like helping people. And I think that's sort of missing from superhero comics as a whole. I'm not one of those guys who's like, we turn too grim and gritty or any of that, but like I those D-Man and Speedball and characters like that who are just like, this is a fun job, like I help people, like it is really just a breath of fresh air. So I'm always happy to like try and get D-Man into things. It's not always easy to get D-Man into a book, but I try.
Oh, is there pushback from editorial? But really, do you want to use D-Man? Really?
I mean, I throw out a lot of names where people have to be like, is that going to sell a comic? Like, does that help anything? Does that help the story? Like, the two concerns are like, does that sell a book, and does it help the story? And like, oftentimes the answer to both is no. But I'm just like, I just like this character, and that's not enough.
I completely understand, and it's funny. I will go to immediate questions in some cases. And Deanie Dude 7 goes, "Hey Matt, great to see you. You mentioned Grunewald as a huge influence for you, and I love that. What about Grunewald inspires you, and what is your favorite story of his? I like his Hawkeye mini."
Well, I love the Hawkeye mini. That amount of Cap, I think, is I mean, it's hard because it's such a long run. But the rise of U.S. Agent and the way he plays when Cap is the captain and the U.S. Agent is Captain America, that whole arc is great. But the thing that inspires me about Grunewald, I think, the reason I keep coming back to his work is he he's amazing because he's doing really smart social satire, political commentary, but he's commenting on everything. I think he's doing a good job of pointing fingers at everybody. He really punches up towards power in a really smart way, where it never feels like, he's not. I never got the sense that he was necessarily preaching his politics. I mean, like, yes, he made Reagan a snake man, but like, he's punching at everybody. But Reagan just happened to be the president, so like, that's who it was at the time. But he's doing that. But the thing that I think that's just a general sort of aspirational thing that I think is smart, of just like doing storytelling that really just like examines the world around you critically is I think always something that we should be keeping in mind in comics. But the thing that I love is his ability to shift gears from comedy to drama. He has some really intense, brutal, heartbreaking stories that have amazing comedic beats, and vice versa. Just like he's just so versatile, and you don't know what you're getting. It's a real roller coaster, and I love that. And I try and do that in my work a lot, and he's a big inspiration for that.
That's awesome, man. And I agree, Henry. Always punch up, exactly. Well, and Grunewald, Cap Wolf is where that was my like. All right, Mark, I'll come back to you. That's fine.
I love Cap Wolf is funny though, because it's like,
it is funny.
It's he gets it. It's a joke. Like it's
sure.
It's his joke, and he's he's having fun, and like he just has to remind you, like, let's not take this stuff too seriously.
Totally.
And then, but we need to be serious about it sometimes, and that's that's the point, is that like he'll do this stuff about drug addiction and about corruption in government and losing faith in your nation and what that means, and like being idealistic and being a hero, but also do a story about a werewolf, and that's like awesome.
I agree again with Denny Dude. I enjoyed the story where a U.S. agent is conflicted over fighting the right-wing groups in the South. That whole dichotomy. Go ahead.
The Watchdog stuff is amazing, because he's there are people who he agrees with on some things, but he doesn't agree with the way they're acting, and I think that's a great superhero thing. And I think it's also one of the reasons that I love U.S. Agent, is because you watch him sort of like, when he starts as a character, he's sort of taking a shot at Captain America, being like, anyone can do this. And once he's in the suit, he realizes that it's not about your personal politics and your personal beliefs. You're something bigger than a guy. You're a symbol, and the weight of that to him is very hard and very heavy. And he comes out of that really respecting Captain America more by walking a mile in his shoes. And I think that's, great storytelling and a great message, but also like great character development.
I agree with that. Now, Robert Lee Jefferson Cofill, he wants to know what your next project is. Man, you're really rushing us, Bob, but I'll take the question. And so that's the first question. Anything you could say about next projects coming up?
No. I literally am working on a ton of stuff right now. Like I'm really busy, and some of it's stuff that I've never done before, and stuff I'm very excited about, and some of it is stuff that I think people will be very unsurprised to see me doing, which I like to do both. I like to sort of operate in the area of stuff that I love and try and do new stuff. But no, like, there's stuff that should be announced soon, but obviously the whole world is in chaos. So
yeah,
announcements and delays and when things are happening is crazy. The only thing I can really talk about of my upcoming stuff, besides Force Works and Hawkeye, which are the current books right now, is I have an Image book coming out that was going to be end of the year, but we'll see.
Maybe push a little further back, or might come earlier?
No, not earlier. We just haven't talked about that. I haven't had the conversation with Image yet. They've got a lot going on, and sure. I think a lot of people are knocking on doors, being like, when is stuff coming out, and when can I plan for this? And we're just trying to be more accommodating to everybody, and so it's me and Tyler Boss, who we did 4 Kids Walking to a Bank together, and we've been working on this for a long time. It's called What's the Furthest Place from Here. And we have 100 some odd pages done, but we want to do it right and put it out when people feel more safe at going to a comic shop, more comfortable, when retailers feel comfortable ordering books and aren't aren't as worried, and so we're taking it easy and just doing it at our own pace, and so
That's cool, and I don't blame you. I talked to Brubaker last week about what he's doing through Panel Syndicate and stuff like that. And again, I am interested in what people think of where the market is going. And it sounds like obviously you're keeping your faith in the stores. Not that Ed wasn't, because of course he's got pulp coming and everything from Image. But yeah, I mean, any of these other alternate forms of distribution or anything, do they appeal to you, or are you considering them at all?
I think they're all interesting. I think it's super, I think doing the Kickstarters and direct to consumers is interesting. And, I was just having a conversation with some other creators about Patreon and all that stuff. I think is very cool. But at the end of the day, like, I'm a comic shop guy. I grew up walking the aisles of a comic shop. That's my love first and foremost. So like, comic shops are having a tough time now, and I would be remiss to sort of, and I don't fault people for doing anything else, but for me, I want to figure out what I can be doing to put people back in comic shops before I figure out what I can be doing to put my stories in people's hands in other ways. That's not my priority right now.
I respect that, man. I also, Robert, I think you're wrong about this, and we'll get back to your list. But Grunewald's the same guy who did Secret Empire with Nixon as the villain and Capo for the Range. I believe that was actually Steve Englehart that did the Secret Empire Nixon story. Unless Grunewald revisited it, I don't know.
No, I think it's Englehart. Yeah, I believe it's Englehart. It's funny because the Englehart and Grunewald has a lot of stuff that sort of nods to the Englehart stuff, and I've had this conversation with some other people where I'm like, yeah, I think Grunewald is, the definitive Captain America writer, and other people are like, well, Englehart did it first, and they do a lot of the same stuff, and Englehart stuff's great too, but for me, I always give the argument like I don't really care who did it first, I care who did it better, and I understand that for some people the Englehart stuff is better, but I also didn't read them at the time. I read the Grunewald when I was a little kid, and I had to go back when I was older to read the Englehart stuff.
I understand. So, I was a little kid for the Englehart stuff, so I understand. Showing our age disparity, but that's good, man. That's cool. I understand. So yeah, no, that's cool. And hey, man, everyone's got their favorites. God bless all of us for who we love and everything. Doing great Cap stories. So how are Force Works going, as Robert had asked earlier?
Force Works is, it's a 3-issue mini, and it ties into Iron Man 2020 stuff. So I'm done on it.
Okay.
I've been done for a while. But there's one issue still that has to come out, but I don't know what the schedule is because it's a tie into an event book. It's a bunch of other stuff. We're waiting on Iron Man 2020 and all the other books. They're rolling out slowly, so I think it'll be a little bit before we get to our conclusion, which is, frustrating because the whole premise of the book was to get to one moment that I think is something that I think is very funny, and I think 20 other people in the world will think is as funny as I am, but I want those 20 people to enjoy it the way I do. But it's I don't know when it's coming, but when it comes, I'm really happy with it, and theoretically there's something coming out of it that I'm very excited about going forward. That I can't really talk about, but there's something that I've been working on for a while that like Force Works sort of spills into, that the Iron Man 2020 spills into, that I'm very excited about, but that's going to be a ways off.
And again, showing my age, I just love that Arno Stark is really part of the modern Marvel universe.
Oh yeah.
And that when that concept was introduced, it was so far in the future, and here we are.
Yeah, it's funny. When I started at Marvel, I remember early on, I said to someone, because I really loved the Arno Stark 2020 stuff, and I said to someone in like 2015 or whenever I was just starting, I was like, what I'd love to do is like start doing some Arno Stark stuff. Start seeding that, getting it out there. And I thought I was like so clever. And then they were like, yeah, you and every writer at Marvel like has an eye on like 2020 Iron Man. Like it's not super clever, and they're like, guess what? In the year 2095, a lot of people are going to be like, hey, we should bring back 2099 characters. You're not going to be a genius for thinking that. And I was like, yeah, I guess everybody here does professionally just sit around and think about this stuff. But to me, I was like, what a clever deep cut that's going to be. And then it's like, yeah, everyone's had this idea for a decade.
That's awesome, man. I also want to acknowledge your great 27 issues of The Punisher.
Oh, thank you.
It was a great run, man. Absolutely. And glad you got to work with Greg Smallwood, one of my favorite artists, among others,
yeah, Smallwood's amazing. He did, when we did the first issue, he did the cover, he did a variant cover for it. And I remember I called and I was like, can we get him to do more covers? And they were like, no. And I was like, this variant cover is like exactly the tone of the book I want to make. Like, he nailed it exactly on just an image. And they were like, yeah, he's booked though. And I was like, okay. And then when we got through the War Machine stuff, they were like, hey, so we're going to relaunch for the new #1. And they were like, and Smallwood's going to be your cover artist on this. And I knew that it was going to be awesome. And he hit it out of the park. 17 straight issues. It was awesome to watch.
That's cool. And I love, again, just like Hawkeye against the Hood, I love the idea of Frank Castle against Zemo.
Yeah.
I thought that was really, really neat.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it was a weird concept because I think people, it was something that spun out of Secret Empire, and I think a lot of times, an event happens at Marvel, and these days a lot of people are like, let's move on from that, and what's the next thing, and what's our next thing, and I really love running with the stories and being like, this mattered and it affected things and it's going forward. And to me, it was like sort of a love letter to Secret Empire, because there's a lot of stuff in Secret Empire I loved, and like I was like, you did this thing that I don't agree with the Punisher, and I want to like address that and make it make sense, and sort of like it made sense, but like I don't want to like cover over it. I want to acknowledge it and deal with the fact that like for the first time in a long time, we're seeing Frank Castle have guilt for like his involvement with Hydra, and so like, how does Frank deal with guilt? Like, how he deals with everything, like with the shotgun. So
he kills people.
He kills people. And so I pitched that to Marvel, and I was like, let's just go do Frank versus Hydra. Like, Frank goes for Zemo. And they were like, yeah, okay. And the funniest part to me was like, a lot of fans were like, oh, this is an indictment of Secret Empire. Like, this is, a reversal or a takedown. I was like, no, this is me loving Secret Empire, and like, and really being like, when we do a story like that big, like it should be felt for years. And so we ran with it for 2 years, and I think it really paid off. I think, what you end up with is a story that goes back before my time as the Punisher writer, and we'll hopefully go forward after.
I love it. I got to talk to Declan about the beginning of his run that obviously got stifled by the shutdown, and what he's planning to do with Frank and Barracuda in the 616. That's going to be pretty interesting as well. I really appreciated your postscript as well to your run, and that was a nice little essay and everything. And you really talked about how Frank kind of affected you in a lot of ways. And you're like, I still don't know if I know everything about Frank, or I'm probably misquoting you. You tell me what you basically said.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a weird. I mean, I can't say exactly what I said. You may have said it better than I did, but
I've got it here.
He's a weird character to spend a couple years living in his head, because he's it's upsetting. He's a if you're not walking away from writing a Punisher book a little screwed up, like I don't think you did the job right, and I like that. I like that. I think I understood him better, and I think I probably understood myself a little bit better after spending that much time with him. And there's some things where you're like, I should work on that, and I should, learn to let things go, and I should not always do this or that, whatever it is. But like you leave a book like that where it's just a character and he's so driven and determined. I think it's hard to walk away from a book like that and not have it be, have a lot of introspection and stuff.
I got the quote here. Still doesn't feel real to me, but I spent over 2 years of my life, 27 issues with the Punisher living inside my head. And in all that time, I don't think I learned any more about Frank Castle than what I knew as a kid. But sometimes I learned a lot from him. I'm going to do my best to get back up when I get knocked down. I'm going to see things through. I'm going to make sure all my debts are paid. I don't look up to Frank Castle. He scares the hell out of me. in fact. But after living with him for so long, it's impossible not to respect him. And yeah, it is that weird code that I think keep us all coming back to him and everything. And it is his weird choices are always interesting. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, he's psychotic in a it's everyone to judge if he goes too far or not. But he's in his mind, he's doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of. I have such a odd. I don't know that it's odd, but my relationship with him is always been something that's fascinating me because he was one of my favorites when I was a kid, and like I had the Mike Zeck poster on my bedroom door that my mom would beg me to take down, and like I just loved him as a kid and was just like, I was a kid. I grew up in New York City, and like it was a little bit of a more rugged, rough town back then, or it was where I was living and where I was from, and I was a kid who couldn't be out late at night and got beat up and would get in fights, and the idea of like, well, there's a guy out there who's doing whatever he can to make the street safer, like it's such a binary simple idea that you're like, yes. And then I hit an age where I was just like, oh, but this is really terrifying. He's shooting people on the subway, like he's murdering people, he's deciding what's right and wrong, and he's not here, like there's no due process. And I as I got older, I really learned to respect the idea of due process and morality and just these concepts that Frank doesn't necessarily adhere to became very important to me. And so I sort of really was repelled by the Punisher for a bunch of years. And then Garth came in, and Garth Ennis's run recenters Frank in this way where you're like, he's a monster, but can we respect the monster? Like, do we, like you fear Dracula, but you're also intrigued by him. You also respect Dracula. Like you maybe want to see him destroyed, maybe you don't, but like, let's just acknowledge that he's the monster. And so that for me made me go back and re-examine and fall in love with the Punisher all over again. And that's, how I could write it. I think a lot of people with my personal politics, which, I believe as a writer, sometimes it's my job to have those things and put them in a story, and sometimes it's my job to do the opposite. I think I was a choice to write the Punisher that raised a few eyebrows at the company, but I think
really that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm sort of I think I was a oddball choice for some people, but
because honestly, given like 4 kids and stuff like that, I would think that it is kind of a crime world that you'd want to get into and stuff.
No, it is. I was happy to do it, but I think some people thought that I would be doing a book where it would really be condemning the Punisher in a way that I didn't want to do, where I wanted to do a book that's a little more thoughtful on that. And I hope I did. I feel like I talked to people on all sides of the political spectrum who were pretty appreciative of the book, and I think at the end that's the goal, is you want to tell stories that speak to people in different ways and raise some questions for them, but they can get enjoyment out of them. So I was pleased with that.
I totally understand. I think that's cool, man. Now Robert asked an interesting question, and I don't think it is an asshole question. You did so much work on X-Men and the X-Men universe, the minis, of course, Jimmy Madrox and Uncanny X-Men. How did Hickman coming back to Marvel affect your plans on X-Men?
It's a weird, they're not my characters. Like they're no one's characters. They're owned by a corporation. So what happens, I think you spend if you spend too much time making plans, it's not necessarily in the best interest of anyone. So I did a bunch of minis because I really like doing minis. I think they're fun. I like stories that have endings. Yeah. But by the time I was writing Uncanny X-Men, Jonathan had already started writing House of X. Like we knew what he was doing. He'd come in and talk to me. I was writing with Kelly Thompson at Epperson when I started. Yeah. And I was on Astonishing X-Men when I found out that Jonathan was coming. And so my Astonishing X-Men plans, I thought I had more runway. And then they were like, we're canceling Astonishing. And I was really upset. And they were like, we're canceling it because we're moving you to Uncanny X-Men. And I was like, oh, well, that's not bad. And, that was a positive thing. But by the time I knew, while I was working on a 2-year plan for X-Men, like I knew that that Jonathan would be there at the end of the 2 years. I probably could have written X-Men for, years and years and years. They're characters that I love and would think about and would love to inhabit their universe, but like he didn't upend my plans, because for the last 2 years of writing that stuff, we were writing towards him. We were working towards giving him the runway to take off. So that as a creative career thing, it didn't change anything for me really. Like a couple things were cut a little shorter than I would have liked. A couple things were like, but I think I could point to any book I've ever written and been like, well, I would have liked to have written a little more of that for the most part. And I think every writer's that way. I mean, I was talking to a writer right before this who was like, yeah, doing 120 pages here, I wish I had 140. And I was like, yeah, you always want 20 more pages. But so yeah, in terms of the career stuff, like it didn't really change anything. In terms of as a fan, Hickman's one of my favorite writers in comics. I think he's a genius, and I was super excited to see what he did, and he killed it, obviously. So
that's cool. I'll ask you one technical thing, Matt. It sounds like your microphone is rubbing against your chest, because every now and then you bounce and you kind of make that microphone bump sound. But it's all good, buddy. And then really, I appreciate the conversation. You mentioned Dracula, and and honestly, I find beyond the obvious of Dracula as a character in general that Marvel's Dracula interpretation is really cool, because it is. I mean, he is so all powerful, and when he shows up in the Marvel universe, would you ever want to use the Marvel Dracula?
Yeah, I love Dracula. I love Marvel's Dracula. I'm a big vampire guy. I think that stuff's super fun, and yeah, Marvel's Dracula has a fun, like, he's like the vampire Doctor Doom. There's always like these fun plans and schemes going, and I think that stuff's really great. I sometimes, the realm I inhabit in Marvel, I think finding a place to use Dracula is often rough. I had a big sort of supernatural pitch that I was very excited about, and it was funny because Ed Brisson's one of my close friends, and
good dude.
He's one of the best, and he's we were friends when we were both doing self-published stuff and indie comics, and we sat down, and I was like, I have this idea for a supernatural thing at Marvel, and he was like, and halfway through he's like, can I stop you? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, can I show you the thing I just sent in? And I was like, oh yeah. And then it was like we'd come to so many of the same conclusions, and his were just better, and I was like, oh yeah, you just like did everything I did but better. So I don't know if all of that stuff's ever going to see the light of day either, but I had a Dracula idea that was baked into that. But that's the only time I've ever tried to touch on him, I think.
Okay. Robert is going to ask, can you name other underrated and underused characters in Marvel or DC, if you can, that you might find intriguing?
Characters that I love, Marvel. I'll go first with Marvel. I mean, like, I think U.S. Agent's underused. I mean, it's all relative, because some people are, like, I think Hawkeye's an underused, underloved character, and other people are like, he's in 6 movies, whatever. But he's not an A-lister, and I think he should be. I think he's warrants that. But I love U.S. Agent as a character. I love D-Man, like I said. The original New Warriors, but especially like Speedball, Night Thrasher, Nova, like I love those guys. Moon Knight's a top 5 favorite character of all time.
Big fan.
That's a dream book. If ever Moon Knight was something I could do, I would stab people to get a shot at Moon Knight. My personal, like, a bunch of the X characters, but I sort of did my time with them. But like Multiple Man and Magic and Havoc and a bunch like that are characters I really love. The big one that I keep mentioning that people are just baffled by is Mr. Immortal from the Great Lakes Avengers. Just a John Byrne character. Just like he has something that I think is so. It's weird, and when I talk about it, people just don't get it. But like when I was a kid and I discovered Wolverine, the thing I loved about my conception of Wolverine, which some of it is there and some of it's not, is that basically Wolverine is just not that special. He's just a guy who always gets back up. And like he wasn't, when I was a kid, he didn't seem like he was an amazing fighter. He wasn't super powerful. His healing factor wasn't as fast, but like he's the guy in a bar fight that like no matter what you hit him with, he's always going to stand up. And it's like, well, eventually that's the most terrifying person you can be facing. Like it's an endurance game for him. It's a war of attrition, and he'll win it and he'll take the abuse. And I think that is like, I love Wolverine now and I love what he's become, but like, you know, he's basically an immortal ninja god soldier kind of thing. And he's a cool character, but like, I miss the idea of just the brawler who always gets back up. And that to me, like, is Mr. Immortal from the Great Lakes Avengers. He's just this like, he doesn't have any powers other than the fact that if you kill him, he comes back to life right after. And that's so cool and like so scary that he was like, you know what I'm going to do with these powers is get in fights. It's like, that's not a good use of that at all. And I love it. I think he's a great character, and I would love the chance to really shine a spotlight on him. For DC, yeah, I mean, I love the Bat Family. I'm a huge Bat Family guy. You know, I'm a big, I don't think it'll surprise people who've like, you know, I wrote Punisher for a long time, but I'm a big Red Hood guy. I love Red Hood. I love Nightwing. I love those characters a lot. Spoiler and all of them. Grifter is a character that I really love. People
absolutely like, big fan of Grifter from the Wildstorm universe. Sure.
Yeah. I said to people and they're like, well, it's not really a DC character. And I'm like, no, it is. And I just think
it is now. Yeah.
I think Grifter's one of those great characters. I love a lot of those, like Spartan and Grifter. A lot of those Wildcats characters I think are great. And those Wildstorm characters in general I love. And you know, people like the Question and things like that. Like a lot of the more street level DC stuff appeals to me more. Like I can, the DC cosmic stuff is great, and I love it, but I never wrapped my head around it in the same way that I did the Marvel stuff. Like the Green Lanterns are great, but they never spoke to me the way that Nova speaks to me, which I think is weird for a lot of people. But like Nova just got to me first, and I got him better. But like the street level characters are always the ones that really clicked for me, for sure.
That's cool. Now I like this editorial comment by Gregory Eskridge that the most unused X-Men character is Dr.Cecila Reyes, in his opinion, and even Hickman hasn't used the character. Any thoughts on Dr. Reyes?
She's great. I love her. I didn't have use for her, but no, I think she's you know, the X-Men used to have a great roster of supporting characters, people in their lives who you know, they would see and meet and deal with. And like the book sort of ballooned as you added more mutants, that it was hard to, you know, how much time are you going to spend with
Pixie?
Yeah, how much time are you going to spend? But like, you know, I put the X-Men in Harry's Hideaway, and it's like, well, how long are they going to spend at a bar, at the local town bar, when they have an island and a campus and a school and there's 200 of them? And it's like, it becomes a real hard choice. And I know that Dr. Reyes is actually an X-Man and on the team. She's suited up. But she just becomes someone that for me, I just didn't see in my stories where she'd go. If I kept going, I do really like her and would have liked to have used her, but I didn't have a place for her at the time. I believe in my X-Men run, she has a unspoken cameo. I believe she is in the scene that is Wolfsbane's funeral. There's a lot of characters there, and there's a lot who don't speak, who were those kinds of characters that like they didn't go to the Age of X-Men. They weren't front and center X-Men, but I wanted to sort of give a little loving nod to them that they're part of the family. And so I believe she's in there. She's definitely in the script. Whether or not she was drawn, I actually don't remember now. But, I had a lot going on at the time, so I can't recall that. But I believe she's in Uncanny 18.
Okay, that's cool. Now, Jason and also the person who identifies himself as Chaos in Comics have asked about new creator-owned stuff. Now, we did acknowledge it earlier, but for the purposes of the live broadcast, I'll let you once again say that you do have something in the works coming from Image.
Yeah, me and Tyler Boss, who did Four Kids Walk Into a Bank, are doing a book called What's the Furthest Place from Here, which is it's not a sequel to Four Kids Walk Into a Bank. I call it a spiritual sequel, but that's actually not a good explanation. It's sort of the spiritual inversion, because Four Kids Walk Into a Bank was sort of a love letter to a lot of the stuff that me and Tyler really love. It was, adventure comics and crime stories and coming of age stories and just sort of all this stuff that we love thrown together. And there's a lot of stuff that didn't make sense and we couldn't leave in the book or put in the book. So What's the Furthest Place from Here is all the stuff that was on the cutting room floor of Four Kids Walking to a Bank. So it's dystopian, sci-fi, sort of punk rock, weird coming of age story that I'm really excited about it. A bunch of people have read it because we every once in a while have an issue that we've been working on it for a long time. And so we printed up copies for charity and sold them, and people were very positive about it. And, I've shown it to some people and they've been very enthusiastic because I don't really have perspective on my own stuff, but I'm really excited about it. And then I have 3 other creator-owned things that are in various stages of development that I can't talk about, but I'm very, very excited about them.
The issue that you sent for charity, was that recently in response to the virus and everything?
No, we actually did an issue for charity. I actually don't remember what the charity was. We when we did Four Kids Walking to a Bank, we would do a lot of conventions together, me and Tyler, or I would do them by myself, or there were some he did. And we'd always print up a variant copy of Four Kids Walking to a Bank that would only be sold at the show, that all the money would go to charity. We really liked doing that. And we'd make it a local charity for wherever the convention was. So, we did the Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project and when we were in Seattle, and all sorts of different, we had one for San Diego that was the San Diego LGBTQ Center. And we just try and always have a different charity that's local. And so we were doing New York Comic Con and had a finished first issue of the book when it was getting announced. So we were like, well, we can just print it up and sell them and it'll be cool. And then there was a long delay in the book because of personal stuff. So there were a lot of people who got the book the first issue a while ago. It's not actually the first issue. It's a part of the first issue. It's 20 pages, but the first issue is 60 pages. So I don't remember what the charity was for that one particular, but so some people have it and it floats around and stuff. But
that's cool. Robert, here's a good question that he asked. What fuels your love for Marvel Cosmic, and what made you go back to Annihilation? It sounds like it might have been the same thing in terms of what you were saying before about events ending, and you're like, no, there are still stories to be told from events.
What's funny is that Marvel Cosmic is something I love as a fan, but not a creator, if that makes sense. I love those stories partially because they're done in a way that my head doesn't do story. The Jim Starlin stuff is so trippy and far out, and just in a lot of those Kirby designs and stuff, when you're dealing with Eternity and Galactus and all these things, Ego the Living Planet, I love these characters partially because they were never something that I would come to naturally. They're not a story I would tell. And so when I try and would think about working in those worlds, it never clicked for me. I would talk to editors about doing cosmic stuff. They'd ask me to come do stuff, and I'd be like, I just can't get my head around it in the way you want. But the original Annihilation and Annihilation Conquest, the follow-up, were favorites of mine because they were the first time that I was like, oh, I get this. These are war stories. This isn't forget the fact that we're dealing with planet eaters and we're strapping Galactus to the front of a ship and all that stuff. This is World War II. This is the Western Front. This is watching planets fall and figuring out where your defensive line is. And especially for Nova and Star-Lord, who are 2 favorites of mine, they're great in characters to the cosmic because they're what I think of when I think of Marvel characters. They're the lovable screw ups. They're the guys who have the great power, great responsibility kind of guys, the people who are in over their heads, and watching them go from I go around and I save a thing here to being generals in a war was just awesome. And just such a good use of the characters, such a good escalation of the characters, and I love that they both came out of it changed. Like they came out and they're very different characters from it, as they should be from the stakes of that. And I felt like Annihilation was a book that I always would talk about and be like, we should be doing more Annihilations. Like we should be doing more things like Annihilation. Like I would love it if we did straight up war stories. I love, the Nom and Sergeant Rock and those comics.
Yes.
Like, huge fan of those. And even like the Nick Fury stuff, like the espionage stuff, but the Howling Commandos books and all that stuff. Like I love that stuff. And the market just is not as strong for those as I wish there was. But Annihilation is a backdoor to doing those. It's a way to do them and make them Marvel. It's not superhero brawls. It's not they're real war stories, and I think that sensibility will work well on a street level book, on a Marvel and Avengers type book. And so I will always bang the drum of Annihilation as much as I could, and just be like, more Annihilations, more things like Annihilation. And so when the anniversary of Annihilation was coming up, they were like, well, you're the dude who always talks about Annihilation. Like, do you want a shot? And I was like, can I have Nova? And they were like, yes. And I was like, then I'm in. So that was it for me.
That's awesome, man. And yeah, Denny obviously agrees that Richard Rider deserved more love, and obviously you got a great handle on him. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think he's one of the great characters of the Marvel Universe. I mean, I think when you read the original Nova stuff, like it's very easy to see a world where, and obviously Nova comes later and is sort of reactionary to the Green Lantern, but it's very easy to see a world where Nova is the Peter Parker of the Marvel Universe. Like Richard Rider could be that character.
Totally.
The kid from Long Island, getting a milkshake at the ice cream shop and like blasted with this energy and then has all this stuff thrust on him. And from there, he's this character who's constantly got this the same sort of punching bag story as Peter, where it's just like, well, he had a team and, he trained the Novas in space and they all died. He comes back to Earth and he joins he doesn't want to go anymore. I mean, his introduction in New Warriors is amazing because Night Thrasher figures out who he is and throws him off a roof because he doesn't use his powers anymore. And like, it's amazing because you're just like, he says to Night Thrasher, like, how did you know? And Night Thrasher was like, I guessed. And it's just such a good, like, it's a good Nova moment. It's a good Night Thrasher moment, but it's he's just this character who's like, he really feels the burden of who he is so well. And yeah, any chance to do more Nova stuff, I jump at. Like getting him back in the spotlight was an honor. He's a favorite.
Is the feeling that Loeb's Nova is now the new focus, and that Richard there isn't as much room for Richard anymore?
No, I don't think so. I think there's love for both. Loeb's was the focus for a while, Sam Alexander, and he's a great character who I really love too. I love what Jeff and them did with him, and Jerry Dutton had a great run. There's a lot, but I think it's just one of those things where it's trying to figure out who's the Nova at the moment kind of thing. There's a few characters like that where there are a few people who operate under the same mantle, and it's trying to figure out. And Sam Alexander, to a lot of readers, is the Nova they came up with. He's the Champions Nova. He's been the Nova in the most recent books. So pulling Rich is asking people to go back a little further, and that's always a little bit more risky. But like, he's a really important character to me, so I was happy to do it. But I said to them, I was like, I want Sam though, at least for a little bit. And they're like, yeah, you can have him. So I got them both in there in Annihilation, which I was pleased with.
That's cool, man. No, I understand. Someone asked earlier if you do a Nova Annihilation or a Nova Night Thrasher book and everything.
Nova Night Thrasher is funny because it's you have the same. I was actually talking to someone about this, about the old Green Lantern, Green Arrow. That book is like a favorite of mine, but it doesn't work anymore because of like certain characters just scale up in power until they, like, their old stories contextually don't make sense. And like Green Lantern is so powerful now that him like driving around in a car with Green Arrow just doesn't really, like, you'd be like, why are they having trouble with these like mean racist dudes in a bar? Like, why is Green Lantern, why is this, like, I understand why it's a problem for Green Arrow, like I don't understand why it's a problem for Green Lantern. And Nova's sort of become that. Like Nova is hard to put in a street level book like New Warriors. So it's hard. When we did the incoming, we were going to set up like stuff that comes after our events and books that's coming for this year. at the end of last year, and Tom Brevoort was awesome and asked me if I wanted to, wrap up Annihilation. And I said, yeah. And he said, I'd love for Nova to be checking back in with Earth. And I said, yeah, I don't see him coming back to Earth. Like, I don't think he really feels like he has a home on Earth anymore. And he's like, no, I don't need that. And he was like, figure something out. And he was like, and I was like, yeah. And I sort of was like, I wonder if like I could do something where the New Warriors like go to find him in 4 pages. And then Tom was just like, just have Night Thrasher check in with him. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's perfect. Like, I just want Night Thrasher to call him. And so my short story in the incoming book is Night Thrasher calling Nova to be like, hey, I need you, buddy. And Nova being like, I'm not that guy anymore. Like, I'm sorry. And it was really, like, it's funny because it's a 4-page story and it's basically just a phone call. But it was sort of like really emotional for me to be like, I knew there was a New Warriors book coming and Nova wasn't going to be a part of it. I knew he was going to be more involved in the Guardian stuff coming. But it was like, to have him give that speech of being like, I'm not the guy that you can count on for that anymore. I'm not in that point in my life, and I don't think I have a home anymore. Like, I was really kind of choked up writing that. I was really moving just because those guys and that team for me was such a big thing.
That's excellent, man. Did you read Grant and Liam's Green Lantern that they're doing at DC?
Yeah, it's great.
I like, because again, and you're right. I mean, really, the Nova Corps was created, and Nova was created as like a Marvel Green Lantern and everything. It all stems back, as I'm sure you know, for your sci-fi history, the Lensmen,
Sure.
the old pulp stuff that Doc Smith wrote back in the day. But I do know that I felt that they kind of captured that same vibe with Hal Jordan, where he's a cop and he was an Earth cop, but he's dealing with all the galaxies and multi-universes and stuff, and really isn't really comfortable on Earth, and or at least doesn't function well on Earth as he does out in the galaxies and everything.
Yeah, I was pitching before Annihilation. I was like, can I do a Rich Rider Nova pitch? And they were like, well, and I was like, I actually have an idea for a Rich and Sam book, and I pitched it, and I don't think it's telling turns out of school because we're not doing it. I basically pitched Gotham Central as
the Nova Corps. That'd be great.
And I was like, it's 2 different stories that sort of overlap. That's different shifts of the Nova Corps and what they mean and what it means to be like Rich, who's sort of on his outs in the Nova Corps and is sort of like the fallen hero, and Sam, who's the rising star, and how they deal with each other and who they are. And I was like, I want like a Nova internal affairs and corruption and all this stuff. And then Grant and Liam's Green Lantern came out, and it hadn't come out yet, but it was announced and they were talking about it, and they were like, yeah, it's a procedural. And I remember one of the other Marvel writers called me and was like, you're trying to do that procedural Nova book? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, well, Grant's doing that with Green Lantern. And I was like, yeah. I was like, I don't think it's a wild assessment to say that me and Grant will not come to the same conclusion.
Right.
And they were like, yeah, you really don't want to go toe-to-toe with Grant on an idea. And I was like, that is 100% true. I really do not. And so I sort of backed away from it. And whatever. But yeah, it was something that I was really excited about for a while.
Because I remember Bendis and Brubaker and Rucka having people who didn't read the books go, well, I liked Powers better when it was Gotham Central. And it's like 2 different books. Yeah, they're both procedurals, but in the same way that different cop shows on television, it can be different procedurals and everything. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's always funny. I'm actually writing a thing that I've been working on for a long time. And a buddy of mine just put out a book that I haven't read yet. And the only reason I haven't read it yet is because I was like, I think this is a very similar thing I'm working on. And I don't want to read his and either be scared away from mine or like, anything like that. And my thing's very different. It's not comics actually, but it's for a different thing. But I was like, the way he writes and the way I write are so different that I know for a fact they are not going to cross over. They're not going to be the same thing, but there's that moment where you're like, oh, the DNA of this comes from the same place. Like we have the same influences, but how you end up cooking them, is what matters. The ingredients can be the same, and give the same ingredients to 10 chefs, and you'll get 10 different things. And I really believe that for sure.
Now, Robert and Gregory are both asking about Incoming, and I don't know how much you can talk about Incoming and everything beyond those 4 pages.
Oh, I mean, it's out.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So, new introduction to a new status quo, essentially.
Yeah, it was sort of a year-end wrap-up / what's coming kind of thing. It's the anthology book that was out at the end of last year. I think it was the 25th or the 31st or whatever. It was Marvel's big. I literally, my room is a mess, and I think you can see there's like lumber and a mattress behind me. So ignore all that.
Don't worry about it, buddy. It's all right. I had a guest blur out their background before they came out, and I'm like, oh, that's. I don't even know how to do that myself.
Oh yeah, if I knew how to do that, I definitely would have. But I have a stack of books, and yeah, Incoming's right here. But if I pull it out, it'll collapse. Yeah, Incoming is just I think it was like 10 of us Marvel writers, sort of setting up explaining status quos, setting up new status quos, and Al Ewing coming in and sort of saying like, "This is a big thing that's coming," and how it all ties together. And so,
right, okay, yes.
Yeah,
right, now I'm with you.
Your book, and I did the Nova Night Thrasher story in there.
Yeah,
but, there's Captain Marvel story and a Ghost Rider story. There's just a ton of stuff that all is like, this is where Marvel's headed. So
fair enough. And then I like what Gregory Eskridge says here. Yeah, Pete Wisdom is a UK Marvel horror character. Sounds cool. Yeah.
That's Pete Wisdom is a. I actually had a Pete Wisdom thing that I think, again, a lot of times I come to Marvel in a very weird place. Me and Donnie Cates talk about this a lot. Like, Donnie is such a fan of, and I am too, of like the huge spectacle. Like, Donnie loves the grandeur of the Marvel universe. He loves the cosmic, and I love the minutia. I love the street level. Like, and I think part of it comes from, a little bit for me, I think, comes from growing up in New York, where like the old Stan Lee, The World Outside Your Window, like it really was like I knew where the Avengers Mansion was. Like, I'd go by it all the time. And like,
I was gonna ask, man, as a New Yorker, do you go to the landmarks and everything?
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, yeah, of course.
Awesome.
And you'd have artists who draw like the Punisher riding the subway, and I'd be like, oh my god, he's on the one train. That's my train. Like, that was exciting to me. And so like, that's the stuff that I love in Marvel a lot. Is how is it the world outside your window? And like, I it's the stuff I want to do, and I love the cosmic. I love the world is burning, and I love celestials falling from the sky. Like, all that stuff is I'm so passionate about. But what I want to do is the stuff that, like, yeah, I could see Night Thrasher. Like, I could see Night Thrasher skating down the street, and like, that's why I was a big fan of like the Netflix shows, where it's just like, these are the things that are like, yeah, a guy could do this. Like, Daredevil could exist. Like, Punisher, wanted to, but he could exist. Like, those kind of things are big for me. So like, the idea of Pete Wisdom and I had a Pete Wisdom pitch that was a bunch of other people, but it was more spy based, because I love that stuff. I love the Marvel spies. I think are great. But they're not. We're in a period of epic right now. We're in a blockbuster period, and so
interesting. Okay, yeah. That's okay. I now and honestly, I'm going to rephrase, because Robert, I'm going to read your question, but I'm going to ask it a different way. But yeah, with Donnie and Al and Matt being, or I should say with Donnie and Al being the hot writers, where do you see yourself in the pantheon of current Marvel writers? Let me ask you this, Matt: Are you getting to write the stories that mostly you want to write? Are they listening to your pitches? Because I think it's Robert. You'll forgive me, but yeah, let me say how great I am. I don't, or whatever, or how not great I am. I think Matthew's obviously again, you're always doing interesting books, Matthew. And again, I really love your handle on Hawkeye. Love what you did with the Punisher. Your Marvel Cosmic stuff was cool. So yeah, where do you see yourself right now in the pantheon?
It's hard to say. I tend to be, Donnie and Al are two very close friends of mine, and guys I love a lot, and so I'm obviously very excited for them. I pretty much love all the Marvel writers. I really get along with them and really love their work. I think, I think we're trying to do different things. For me, I don't know. I set, when I started writing comics, my initial goal was like, I want to write a comic for Marvel Comics. That was it. And I got that pretty quick and was like, oh, time to reassess. And I was like, I would like to, before my time is up, write an X-Men comic, write a Star Wars comic, write a Punisher comic. And then I hit a point 2 years ago where I was like, I'm the writer on X-Men, Star Wars, and writing a Star Wars book and writing The Punisher.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, what do I do now? And so I'm sort of now I'm really invested in trying to do stuff that I think is fun that maybe other people wouldn't do. I think that there are a lot of fans like me who are fans of the outskirts of the Marvel universe that don't see the love and that don't see characters get the love they deserve. And I like being a champion of those characters. And like, I fought really hard for that Hawkeye book, and I fought hard to make sure that Nova was a focus on Annihilation and was sort of brought back. And a lot of the stuff I'm trying to do now is that kind of stuff. I will say I'm doing a very, very big, like, bucket list life dream book that is like, a top 5 book. But for me, Uncanny X-Men was my top 1 book, and I wrote, 25 issues of it. So I don't know. I'm bad at perspective. I have a low opinion of myself. I tend to like look around the room and I think like, man, like Ed Brisson, Kelly Thompson, Al, Donnie, Nick Spencer, Jerry Duggan, Hickman, Jason Aaron. Those guys are heroes of mine across the board. So like, I don't rate myself with them. I just feel lucky to be hanging out in the room.
Wow.
I know. The only writer I would say I hold my own with is Zdarsky, because that guy sucks.
Fuck that guy.
It's funny because everyone always like
Chip.
I love Chip so much, and everyone always makes fun of Chip and like is always like cracking on him, and I like all the time feel so protective of him because he's like, besides being funny and amazingly talented and one of the best writers in comics and a great artist, he's also just like an unbelievably kind person. And I'm always kind of like the dude who gets online and posts really earnestly about like how great Chip is. And then everyone just sort of piles on, is like, but he sucks. And nobody means it. But I get like real defensive where I'm like, no, he's actually like really like a person I really look up to and admire a lot. So
Matthew, I was talking to Fraction a week or two ago, and I'm just, again, because he introduced me to Chip through Sex Criminals and just getting to know Chip and everything. And I'm so happy for Chip because really he's writing exceptional Marvel stuff. Yeah. And really starting with Howard the Duck. And then, I mean, God, his Daredevil is great. I loved his Invaders. Yeah. And I thought that was fantastic. I mean, really, no, I'm a huge fan of Chip's, and Chip will be talking to us next week on Word Balloon Live, so that'll be lovely. But yeah, no, I'm with you, man, and yeah, you're doing great, Matthew. But also, isn't it interesting that and it's funny because as a younger writer, it's interesting to hear that. I can appreciate the young, ambitious guys saying, "Man, it'd be great to work for Marvel and do these things." But I really do believe that you'll be able to, and it'll be fun to see with your image book coming in these other creator-owned things, that you'll likely take your Marvel audience with you on these other ideas and stuff. Yeah, and I mean, that to me seems to be the new ambition, just as because everyone goes through the phase of being a flavor of the month. And I'm not suggesting, that for you, but I'm just saying that, your time at the big two, might be limited, might not. But again, I think the key is to get yourself known and then bring everybody over to the stuff that you're passionate about. That is the stuff you own.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, I think it's always interesting to me because I had a weird trajectory where I hadn't done a lot of work before I was at Marvel, and then We Can Never Go Home and Four Kids Walking on Back came out, and I felt like I brought a lot of fans to Marvel. Like, a lot of people followed me, and I talked to a lot of people on Twitter or at shows or at store signings where they say like, I've been following you since this, like, you got me reading this, and that to me is like such an honor that people would follow you. Marvel's such a dense, complicated thing, and but at the end of the day, like, I think we all believe, well, it's storytelling, and we're telling stories, and if you like us telling independent stories, you'd like the Marvel ones, and vice versa. So it's always an honor, and I hope people follow me in my creator-owned stuff, but I'm hoping I get to do Marvel stuff for years and years. I mean, like, I love these characters in this universe. Like, I'm not going to pan around the room to show you, because I actually disassembled my bookshelves in
no problem, buddy.
In isolation bad thinking nightmare time, I was like, I should reorganize my bookshelves. So they're not an exaggeration, like 750 or 800 Marvel trades stacked up on the floor next to me. It's sort of nightmarish, but if you're looking for a Marvel book for the last 2 decades, it's within arm's reach if you want, if you want me to grab it.
Don't worry, Matthew. My camera is strategically pointed as well, and I'm sitting in an Oscar Madison room right now, so don't sweat it. It's all good.
It's not. My camera is strategically placed, and you're still getting lumber and a mattress against the wall, so that should give you some sense of it.
I had an ironing board in the background, and mostly it just looked like this like orange blob. But I'm like, all right, I'm moving the ironing board. That doesn't look good right there and stuff. I got my beautiful here. I'm sorry, wrong finger. The Batman animated series Dan Davis print, so that's a nice splash of color and stuff. And people can't see it, but I've got a bunch of my art commissions that I've gotten over the years on my walls and stuff like that. So.
I own one original page of art. That's
interesting. Tell me.
I'm not a collector. I am a collector by nature.
Clearly with 800 Marvel books on your floor right now, yeah.
I mean, it's a problem, and so I have a record collection, and there's a video game guy and toys. I'm that dude. Like I have that. I'm straight edge, so I don't drink. So like my weird addictions and vices go into other things problematically.
That's awesome.
But when I got into comics, I was like, oh, you can buy original art? That's awesome. Like when I got into making them, I was like, you can buy original art? That's awesome. And then I was like, nope, absolutely cannot dip my toe in that. And so I own one page which was gifted to me, but it was something, it's actually a funny story. The comics, Image does their Image Expo. They haven't done one, but 2 years ago they did it, and they announced that my book with Tyler Boss was going to be there, and it was a bunch of friends, and it was awesome. It was in Portland, and the Comics Pro, the retailer forum, was there, the retailer summit. Mm-hmm. And they have a charity auction at Comics Pro. And I went with Jerry Duggan. We went out to dinner, and then he was like, let's go to the auction. And he was a little tipsy.
Okay.
And he was like, he went in, and there was a signed Alan Moore Swamp Thing script. And Jerry was like, I want it. And I was like, go for it, man. And he was like, we should split it. And I was like, I don't know how that makes sense because he didn't sign every page. So who gets the page that Alan Moore signed and who just gets like the back half of a Swamp Thing script? And he was like, I want it. And he got a paddle for the auction, and he was like, if this goes above $200, like wrestle the paddle out of my hands. And I was like, all right. And so we're in this auction. It's all retailers, and like I think we're the only pros there. And it goes up, and it's just shooting up really fast. And Jerry's bidding on this Alan Moore script, and it gets above 200. I'm like, Jerry, you gotta stop. And he's like, no, 300. And I'm like, no. And he's like, spot me $100. And I was like, Jerry, no. And then it gets way too rich. And he's like, oh. And then he's like, all right, let's get out of here. And we go to leave. And they said, next up on this panel is a Michael Bendis written and drawn page from Jinx. And that's an all-time favorite book of mine. One of the reasons I want to make comics. And I just like stopped, and Jerry like thrust the panel into my hands, and he was like, go. And I was like, if it goes above $200, stop me. And it started, and I put up my hand, and I was the first one to put up, and it started at $50, and I think like 6 people put up their hands, and they were like $50. And Dirk Wood from IDW was the auctioneer.
Okay.
And he went $50 to rising Marvel superstar Matt Rosenberg, and the whole room is retailers. And it was like I had come in as an outsider into their auction, and they all turned and looked, and it was like I think 6 people besides me put up their hand when it was $50, and he was like, "Do I hit 75?" And maybe 80 hands went up because they all wanted to bid against me on this, and it was going up, and like it got real heated, and like I'm yelling at people, being like, "I signed at your store, like don't you bid against me?" And Jerry's drunk, and he's yelling at people, and like it was a ton of fun, and it was really awesome. And it got to like $300, and I spiked the panel, and I was like, "Forget all of you," and we stormed out. And at the end of the night, I was hanging out at a bar, in the hotel bar, and a guy came up to me and he's like, "Hey, I wanted to show you something." And I was like, "Yeah, what's up?" And he pulled the page out, and I was like, yeah, congratulations. And he was like, "No, I'm a big fan of your work, and I thought it was really uncool that everyone bid against you on that." And he was like, "I bought it for you." And he handed it to me. And I was like, what can I do for you? And he was like, just come sign at my store at some point. And I was like, I will be there. And I haven't yet still, although I talked to him recently, and I'm going to. But so that's the only page of original art I have, and it's hanging above my fireplace.
See, and there you go. And that is the beauty of the retailers, and they care about the community, and they care about the creators, and that is a fantastic story. And hello, Dean Haspiel, by the way. That's why I threw that up there and stuff. Dean's awesome, and Dean will be doing one of these. I will be twisting his arm very violently to make sure that happens. I love that guy.
My first published work ever was on Dean's old website, Trip City. I did
that's fantastic, man.
Yeah, Dean is.
That's excellent.
Dean gave me my start for sure. Dean and Chris Miskevich.
That's fantastic. I love those communities, and right now I'm blanking on the one previous to Trip City that Dean helped create, where Simon Fraser was there and Mike Cavalut. Oh God, I'm blanking on his name right now. He and JMD and Mateus do such great work together.
Oh yeah,
Cavallero, Mike Cavallero. So yes, really really cool stuff. So it's great. There you go, right back at you, Dean. Absolutely. So Activate. Thank you, Dean. Good man. That's what it was called. He just chimed in the thing. It is Activate. Of course it was. That's what it was. Neat stuff. Yeah, you're here now. Comic Works with Jimmy wanted to ask, and you kind of touch on it a little bit. How did you get into comics?
Well, that's always a weird question because I never know if people mean professionally or as a fan.
Well, we can do both. We got time.
We can do both. Professionally, well, my first published stuff was through Dean and my buddy Chris Miskevich, who's a great writer and another New York comics personality. I was doing a comic I was self-publishing, and it was sort of an anthology short. Me and my buddy Patrick Kinlan, who's a comics writer, and we had a thing called Menu, and it was a anthology shorts about a kid and a dog in the wasteland of America after the end of the world, sort of thing. And Chris and Dean were like, this would be a cool thing for the website, and so we started putting it up there, and people got excited. So that was my first thing. My first published physical book is a weird story, but I used to work in the music industry.
Indeed, I was hoping to talk about music. Go on.
Yeah, and I think I talked about this a little bit with you last time I was on, but someone from the music industry knew that I worked in music, and someone from Sony Records who knew I worked in music and was trying to do comics, and they put me in touch with a guy, and I was working in a comic book store at the time, and sort of just trying to make my own stuff, and this guy called me up and he was like, hey, can I, I'm trying to make a comic, I manage some artists, and I want to can I take you out to lunch? And I was at the point where all you had to say was take me out to lunch, and I'd probably be there. It was about that level of broke. And I said, sure. And we went out to lunch, and, I talked to him about comics and how they work and all this stuff. And he was like, yeah, my artist wants to do a comic, packed in with the record. And at the end of the conversation, I was like, hey, man, I just got to know, who is the artist? And he was like, oh, it's RZA and Ghostface Killah from the Wu-Tang Clan. And I was like, oh, okay. You need to take everything that I said about comics and throw it out the window, because I was assuming this was someone who was trying to make their first record and also make a comic. I was like, they can sell a book. And then it spitballed from there, and I ended up doing my first book, which is called 12 Reasons to Die. It was on Black Mask. At a certain point, there will be a collected edition. It is a very weird crime, horror, rap comic that ties into a Ghostface Killah record that RZA and Adrian Young produced. But it has a lot of amazing art. I think there's 28 artists on it because it's all these shorts that are interconnected. So that was my first published thing, and it all spitballed from there. How I got into comics, my older brother had comics, and I was forbidden to touch them. So of course that was the thing I did whenever he would leave the room. But
what were those first books that you were reading?
X-Men. Okay,
there you go.
The Claremont X-Men.
Sure.
That and Fantastic Four.
Excellent.
Were the ones that I remember. And super.
Who? Oh, John Byrne was writing Fantastic Four back then?
Yeah. It was
cool. Great run.
I mean, I was, barely literate. I was literally learning to read on these books. But
that's fantastic, man. And again, you're reading great stuff in it. Dude, Jerry Conway blew my 9-year-old mind killing Gwen Stacy. And it's not the original issue. I always have to point out it was the Marvel Tales reprint of the early 70s. But
Sure,
yeah, man, and seriously, that's like the greatest thing I was able to tell him was, you did not turn me into a postal killer. You turned me into a guy that appreciated that stories can have consequences.
Oh,
And
yeah.
happily ever after is not always going to be the ending.
I mean,
So,
I said recently in a thing, I was like, I was probably 4 or 5 when I was reading the Dark Phoenix stuff and the death of Jean Grey, and I didn't know what it meant. I didn't understand it, and I was like, and I revisited it when I was 12, and I revisited it when I'm 17, and I revisit it every 5 years of my life, and and then I'm at a point in my life where I'm writing the resurrection of Jean Grey and bringing her back from this, not from that, but from her death, from a different death, but still. And I'm rereading it, and I was like, every time I read it, I get something more out of it, but also I still don't fully understand it. And I was like, that's the beauty of it. It's like, it speaks to you differently when you're a little kid, and when you're a teenager, and in your 20s and in your 30s. It speaks to you differently each time, and there's always something new to sort of find and discover, and that's great comics. But yeah, both my parents were writers, and so they always encouraged me to read, and I grew up with a comic shop on my block, so it was pretty easy to be a reader. Yeah.
Tell me about what your parents wrote or write.
My mom was an editor, actually. She was a book editor. She only ever wrote one thing that got made. She wrote a slasher movie.
Crazy.
Yeah, she wrote a movie called Maniac, that if you're big into...
Maniac?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maniac. If you're big into like late 70s, early 80s sort of pulp horror, it's a pretty pivotal one. Joe Spinell and Bill Lustig, and sort of a early template for some of the stuff in like Silence of the Lambs, but it's a pretty terrible movie. But yeah, my mom wrote that.
Oh, and how ironic, Dean Haspiel acknowledging, I'm assuming Maniac by saying that.
Yeah,
there you go.
Dean was very excited about that. There's a certain group of people, not to call Dean weird, but Dean's a little weird. There's a certain group of people who Maniac is like a pivotal, important movie for them.
I understand. What about your dad's stuff?
My dad wrote a ton of stuff. He wrote one of the great doctoral works, scholarly works on Thomas Carlyle, the philosopher, economist, sociologist. He wrote 9 novels. He was the head writer on like 6 seasons of like network police procedural stuff in the early 80s.
Oh, what shows? My God.
The only one that people here know, it's big in Canada, but less so here. There was an NBC show called Night Heat.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, my dad was the head writer on Night Heat.
Wow.
But my dad, interestingly, he has a plaque. There's a plaque in my parents' house for that the Writers Guild awarded him. He is the it's true. My dad has a plaque that was given to him by the Writers Guild. He is the most prolific TV movie writer of all time.
That's incredible. Dude, I am obsessed by TV movies, especially ones from the 70s, and I'm so thrilled that fans of YouTube are throwing up these crazy movies. And again, I was talking to Brad Meltzer recently. I just dropped the episode, and there's this terrible Houdini movie that's Starsky from Starsky and Hutch. Paul Michael Glaser plays Houdini, and Gloria from All in the Family, Sally Struthers, plays his wife, and Vivian Vance is the narrator of the movie from I Love Lucy. And it's just insane. But there were great like horror movies that were made. I mean, as I'm sure, the Night Stalker, of course.
Sure, yeah.
And Steven Spielberg's Duel. I mean, that's the thing, man. There were gems among these. Like, all right, we need a 70-minute movie to throw in a 90-minute block or whatever. Let's do it. So, God, man, I'm gonna. What's your dad's name? I'll IMDb him later and enjoy his filmography.
His name is Philip Rosenberg.
There you go, man. I look forward to checking it out. That's great, man. And so, like, was that like? Did you want to follow in the how did you stumble into writing then? I mean, was it something you wanted to do, or?
Oh no, definitely not.
Well, and like you said earlier, you were in the music business.
Yeah, so. Yeah. I basically did everything I could to not be a writer. I sort of, I think having, and my dad was an editor for a while too, and taught writing, and so having parents who were editors and writers and teachers, like that was sort of, if not on a genetic level, was sort of baked in on a physical, like looming over me, reading my homework assignments kind of level. But
true, probably, yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't want to do it. My uncle was a writer too, and I just didn't want to do it. And I really loved music and wanted to get into music, and left high school and just sort of tried to figure out music stuff. And I ran a label and put out records and toured the country and toured the world with bands and stuff. And that was my passion. And then it just hit a point. I remember I was on the phone with my buddy who had another indie label, and I was talking to him, and I was like, man, I'm just having a hard time like getting excited about shows. And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't know. I'm not going to see as many bands. And he's like, to sign? And I was like, no, for fun. Like there was a point when I was going to like 4 or 5 concerts a week, and that was like my job and my life. And he was like, he was like, I haven't listened to music for recreation in years. And he was like, no one who runs a label does. And I was like, what? And then I started asking every label guy I knew. I was like, do you listen to music? And he's like, no, man. People were like, I listen to books on tape, or like, no, I like silence. And everyone was just burned out on music. It's a really brutal job, and really like when your passion becomes, there's that old like expression, like, find the thing you love and do it, and you'll never work a day in your life. And it's like, well, that's the positive way of looking at it, and the negative is you'll start to hate the thing that you love. And that, as I saw that start to creep into my life, that I was like, dreading going to shows and dealing with people. And it's very much I was like, I need to do something else. I need to find another thing. And the only thing I loved as much as music was comics. I loved comics my whole life, and I was like, I guess I'll try and figure out how to write comics. And that was it, and that set me down the path.
So give me the years of when you were in music specifically. Doing the label and everything, and booking bands.
I started the label in I was in high school.
That's fantastic. First of all,
yeah, I had
early 2000s. I mean, again, forgive me, Matt. I'm bad at math.
Late 90s.
It was late 90s. Okay, wow.
Yeah. So it's weird because I when I was 15, 16, my parents moved. I grew up in New York, and my parents just got burned out on New York. And they bought a house in Connecticut, and we're like, we're moving to Connecticut. And I was like, I'm about to go into my junior year of high school. And they were like, you can stay. So I just lived by myself in New York. And, they weren't far away. They were an hour and a half away.
But but still, Jesus, that's really progressive of your parents to, and I mean, because really taking a kid out like that late in high school and stuff, that could be harsh. So I'm glad they recognize that. And that they thought you were responsible enough to kind of handle doing it on your own. Did you have extended family still in New York that would keep tabs on you and stuff? No? Wow. No.
I had a brother, but he was off at college.
Okay.
No, they just, they thought I could handle it, and I sort of could and sort of couldn't. But I got a roommate who was my friend Susan, and she was into music, and we started a label together, and we're putting out 7 inches for hardcore bands, and then
45s for people, exactly, sure, to bridge the age gap of all of us and everything. Absolutely, 7 inches. That's great. Well, and my background in rock music and stuff. That I worked at WXRT for 10 years, and high school radio was right there in the new wave era, and college radio, and was my program director of both stations when I was a kid, and really thought my career was going to go into music. So I understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like the music thing coincided, like I with the collapse of the rise of Napster, and
that's what I was going to say, Matt. Absolutely.
It was such a brutal, like, I was watching people lose their houses, and I was never, I was paying my rent, and that was it. Like I was paying my rent, but eating ramen 20 out of 30 days a month kind of thing. And borrowing money and all that stuff. And then when it started to take a turn, like, we were doing well, actually. We were doing bands that were doing like 20 or 30,000 records, which for like an indie label was great.
Absolutely.
as I saw it starting to dive, and like we were losing distributors left and right. That was a funny thing for me in comics, because I came from like doing all these different things in music, and so I understood like marketing and press and outreach and retailer relations and all that stuff. And I'd done all of it. I'd done end cap buys at Best Buy, and like cold calling retailers, and like booking tours, and college radio outreach and stuff like that. And when I got into comics, I was like, wait, there's just one distributor. It's just Diamond. Like everybody's on a level playing field. I just have to deal with them. And like, the worst part of running, I think if you talk to anyone who ran an indie record label back then, the absolute worst calling was retail. Worst thing, part of the job was retail calling. Was calling, you just pick 2 days a week and just call record stores. And you call a store, and you don't know if you're talking to the owner of the store or the 16-year-old clerk, and you're talking to him for 40 minutes and hyping your records. And then at the end of it, he goes, who carries your records? And you go, oh, we're carried by Revelation and Very. And he goes, oh, we don't buy from them, buy. And you're just like, oh, well, okay. You can't get my records in this store because they don't deal with our distributors. And wow. It was such a nightmare that I was like, oh, Diamond, it's just a single entity? That's awesome. Like, I have a fighting chance of like having books in stores. And that was a big thing for me.
That's incredible, man. Absolutely. And as in our previous conversation, I'm fascinated by your music career. And also I wanted to ask, Ben, I'm glad we got into this. It is interesting during the lockdown, and I love that all these bands and all these artists are doing these home performances. And as a music lover, it's just amazing. And really my favorite people are, Paul Weller and Neil Finn. And I just love what they're doing online and stuff. And I mean, obviously those are drops in the bucket compared to everybody else that's also doing it. And I love that they got to perform, and that's terrific. And what a gift to all of us. And again, these are these amazing byproducts of this terrible situation.
Yeah. I will say, like, I definitely feel like, for me, I'm sort of a recluse these days. Like, I stay in my house a lot. I just work a lot, and going to the comic shop is a weekly ritual for me. Every Wednesday, I'm in my local comic shop, and I feel for everyone who's not is missing that connection and that outreach and that those moments, and being able to browse the books, and all the retailers who are hurting, and all the people who are telling stories. But man, musicians, it's like a terrifying thing. Like, I can't even imagine if your lifeblood is being a touring working musician. Like, I don't know when that's back on its feet, but
Well, and also, I mean, this really is a time for musicians to, again, maybe change the status quo in a way that, Napster was out of control, but it brought power back to the live performance.
Yeah.
And now that the live performance is gone, I mean, I really do hope that, fans, I mean, and that's why I love, Patreon, as you well know, was created by the guy from Pomplamoose, Jack Conte, and everything. And,
I think comics often, hey, David, comics always has an interesting thing, because obviously it's storytelling, and we all love it, and we feel like storytelling is just accessible. Like, anyone can read it. If you can read, you can read a comic. There are comics you can read even if you can't read, and there are, it feels very accessible, but it is very not accessible to a lot of people. It's very much like a specialty shop thing, and we sort of hope for, digital comics and these movies to be putting people in comic shops and all these things to change it. But I think, like, the status quo of what comics is fundamentally the same. And for music, like, the status quo of music was buying albums, and that shifted in the last 20 years to live performance, and that now may have to shift again. And, like, I just urge people, if there's a musician you love and there's a band you like or anything, like, buy some records, like, own some physical media from them, because they really need it in the same
100%, man. No, way. And in fact, I mean, and old fart like me going to see live performances, I always buy the CDs that they're selling and stuff at their tables and that. And it's, you got to, because they need you more than ever. It, again, as an observer of the record industry from, my time in high school and college radio in the 80s and then in the professional world in the 90s and stuff, and then watching it shift, and then also knowing the history of it too, and that all these big labels and stuff would really support these bands. And then, like you say, yeah, the whole model changed. A good friend of mine was an A&R person at A&M Records, and we were all excited for her out of college getting that gig. And yeah, 10 years later, here comes Napster and destroys the business and everything that she was doing and stuff. And yeah, it's just amazing. So
yeah.
Yeesh. Well, back to comics, and people have some good questions here.
Let's go.
The best ad for a book I ever read was Matthew's Hawkeye Free Fall of him in the woods with a bow. Classic. Very nice. But there was...
Yeah, that was thank you. That was actually the woods at my mom's. That was where my mom lives. That was her backyard. But I did buy a bow when Hawkeye got greenlit. I bought a bow and arrow, and I was like, I should really learn how to do this. And I watched a couple online tutorials, and I took a couple lessons. And I'm not Hawkeye level good, but I can shoot a bow and arrow.
That's cool. My favorite story about archery is the actress Gina Davis really getting into archery and then getting to Olympic level. Yeah, and actually being able to compete and everything. So, it's you kind of, and I was a big Mike Grell Green Arrow guy as well. Sure, yeah. And Hawkeye Green Arrow. Let's talk about that because I love them both, and it isn't a Star Trek Star Wars debate for me.
No, I don't think it's a Star Trek Star Wars debate. I simply because my brother was a Marvel guy, that's what I inherited, and so I grew up as a Marvel guy more than a DC guy, and so my affinity always, like, on a lot of these things, I'm always like, well, I understand that Green Arrow came first, but like Hawkeye came first to me, so that had the emotional. And it's the same as the Green Lantern Nova stuff. Like, Nova came into my life first, so I have the resonance for Nova more than Green Lantern in some ways. But I mean, Green Arrow is a character that I've always just loved, and Green Arrow is a character that I think, like, they just. He's not like Hawkeye, where there's sort of been a radical reimagining of him in the same way. Like Matt Fraction and David Aja's Hawkeye is a radical sort of departure of what the book is, and I think the book will never be the same from that. Agreed. And but Green Arrow has a great gradual evolution to who he is in the DC universe that I love, and I think he has such a special place in that world. Like, he's just such a good character.
I think too. Like you said, I mean, it really started with Neil Adams kind of, tearing down what had come before when he was just Batman with a bow and arrow during the Golden and Silver Age. And then, that whole radical liberal streak that came during Hard Traveling Heroes with Green Lantern and everything. And then Grell, I loved making him into the mature hero.
Sure.
And suddenly he was the oldest hero in the DC universe, and I really liked that it borrowed from Grell's John Sable. I felt in a lot of ways, where really was kind of a mature hero. Yeah. And again, this was in my college years, so I loved it. And I love Arrow. I love the TV show Arrow. I thought they did a good job of it. Yeah. And I felt Amell, as he progressed in each season, became more and more like the older Ollie because he was aging as well. Yeah, not to the point that the Grell character did. But I like Rebirth because it really did feel like they kind of got back to the spirit of, I think, what made him unique during his best periods and stuff. Kevin Smith obviously did tremendous stuff with him as well. Yeah. So, here's Denny Dude. Here's an interesting question. Yeah, how did you get Otto Schmidt for Freefall?
Well, I didn't. The Marvel did, but the funny thing is, like, Freefall was a book. I did Tales of Suspense, and it was me and Travel Foreman and
awesome book. Awesome book.
Thank you, Alana Smith, our awesome editor. Like, put up with all our nonsense while we made that. It was a blast. And I said, I have this Hawkeye idea. What I actually wanted to do right after, I wanted to do a Bucky Black Widow book, and I was like, I have this story, and they were like, well, Black Widow has to go do this other stuff, and I was like, oh. And she was like, could you do it with Bucky and someone else? And I was like, yeah, I don't know. And I thought about it. And then she was like, why aren't you doing Hawkeye? And I was like, well, I assumed that I couldn't, like, Hawkeye wouldn't be on the table. And she was like, for you, it probably is. For a lot of people, like, not. And so I pitched this Hawkeye thing, and she loved it. And then Punisher was continued, and Uncanny X-Men fell in my lap, and I was like, I need to give the Hawkeye book its time, and I had this long conversation of, like, can we put this on the back burner, and can you hold it for me? And they were like, yes. He's going to be in Kelly's West Coast Avengers, and that'll fulfill a need for him. He'll be present, and So we came back to it when I was wrapping up X-Men and Punisher, and Marvel kept throwing artists at me who I think I had to send Ricky Purden, who's the head of talent at Marvel and is one of the truly great people on earth, and Alana, my editor, who is also awesome. I had to send them, I think, a half dozen emails where the gist of the email was basically like, they would send me an artist and I would say, look, I would love to work with this person. This would be a dream book for me on anything else, but this isn't my vision of Hawkeye, and I'm sorry. And it kept being people where I was like, this person's available, can we get something else going? Like over and over. And I was like, I know that's such a difficult thing to say, to be excited about someone and say they don't fit. And then Alana called me and was like, what do you think of Otto Schmidt's work? And I was like, he's a genius. And she was like, would you want him on Hawkeye? And I said, is he available? And she went, oh, I don't know. And I was like, oh, Alana, you can't do that to me. And then he opened up and wanted to do it and come over and do a little time in the Marvel universe, and I was ecstatic. And he just makes the book what it is. I stand by that he's a genius after working with him for a while.
A great, exciting design, absolutely, man. No, it really does have its own voice because of you and Otto together. It's amazing. So yeah I completely agree with all of that.
He's just great, and I'm friends with Ben Percy, and Ben had worked with him on some Green Arrow stuff, and I said to Ben, I was like, what do I need to know? I think Ben was in New York signing books, and I went out to hang out with him, and I was like, Ben, what do I need to know about Otto? And he was like, get out of his way, just let him do his job. Like, don't, he's better than we are at our job, so just follow and ride his coattails. And I was like, that's the best advice. Like, it's great, and he certainly is. And I feel really lucky to work with him on this.
And give me the full name again of Alana, your editor.
Alana Smith.
Alana Smith. I'm interested because, as you said earlier, sometimes books don't fit into the big picture or the big thrust of where a lot of the main books are going, whether it's an event or just a general status quo. But there always seem to be editors like, and I'm reaching back for a couple, and maybe I don't know if Mark Panici is still at Marvel, but I know Warren Simons used to be, and now is at Valiant, or maybe he's somewhere else right now. I don't know, but I always appreciated those guys because they would always get like Jeff Parker's Marvel books, like Agents of Atlas and stuff, and that under the radar stuff that could tell its own story with a B or C level character. And like you said, these are kind of the interesting, quirky corners and stuff. Do those editors still exist? Is Alana that kind of editor?
For sure. I think for me, it's funny because I remember when I was coming up in comics, like trying to make them and stuff, there were a lot of my friends, some of whom are very successful comics writers now, some of whom do other things, but like we would all like talk and compare notes. And I just noticed that I was one of those people who was definitely gravitating towards editors a lot and being like, I love everything this person does. And for me, it was, Stephen Wacker.
Sure. Good guy.
Great Spider-Man editor.
Love Steve. Yeah.
Will Moss, who was at DC. And
Will Moss, excellent editor. Absolutely.
Like everything they do. Mark Doyle at DC is one of those people. And they're just these editors who are just, Axel Alonso for me is like, a top of the pedestal. Like he's as close to a Mount Rushmore editor as it comes for me.
I completely agree, and I understand. And he obviously, just like Dan DiDio, and forgive me for interrupting, but I really want to take a moment about Axel because it's like Axel has nothing to apologize for. He has an incredible career. He has a great eye for what is interesting in comics, and I hope to talk to him now at his new job at AAA. The thing that he's doing with Jemison and everything, because I think he's an incredibly smart guy and really corrals the right people and the right ideas.
Axel, it's funny because a lot of I said the Mount Rushmore of editors, and then I was thinking about that, and I think a lot of the obviously Karen Berger is one of those people, and
also on there
for me, and Will Dennis, and there's just a lot of these editors who are just flawless. But Marvel, I can't speak as much to the DC. A lot of the DC editors that I know are really great, but I haven't worked with them as much. I've only ever done one issue at DC, so I don't have the wealth of experience. But I think Marvel has these great editors, and Darren Shan, who actually came over from DC, but is edited a bunch of my stuff, is just a great guy who's looking for interesting things. Jake Thomas was the editor who brought me into Marvel, and I think is bar none one of the best in the business. I'm going to leave people out and feel like a monster, but I worked with Mark Paniccia. He was my X-Men editor for a while, and then it became Jordan White and Mark.
Jordan's excellent too. Glad you mentioned Jordan.
Excellent. Yeah,
good, dude.
Obviously Tom Brevoort is one of the
Tom's awesome. Yeah.
You can't do the Mount Rushmore of comics without Tom. But yeah, for me, Joe Quesada, like,
of course,
his time as editor in chief, like that.
Sure.
That is my for me. Like, I read Marvel before that. That is my golden era. Is Joe as editor when he's bringing in Bendis and David Mack and then Bruce Baker, all those people. Joe as editor in chief is I think when comics, the best moment in Marvel history to my, and I know that people are going to be like, you're saying that's better than
Stan and Jack.
It also look, I love Stan and I love Jack and I love Ditko and all of that stuff so much, and I can talk about any era of Marvel with love. But for me personally, the Joe Quesada's era of editor in chief spoke to me in a way that the comics like changed the course of my life. And so for me, it's a very personal thing of just like reading Bendis superhero comics and just being like, oh, I didn't know you could do this, and reading Brubaker and all those people. It's just
I'm with you, man. I'm with you. Well, and again, as an older reader, they brought me back to comics, and Brubaker did at DC and Rucka did at DC when they were doing their stuff. But no, you're right. And in fact, I love talking to editors because, and in fact, I'll be talking to Shelley Bond in a week or so. And it was great. And I've talked about this before. I don't think I'm speaking out of school. DC just has this rule about not letting editors talk, and it drove me insane. And literally, I would badger Will Dennis for like 10 years and be like, a day's going to come that you're not there, man, and I expect to get a lot of stories from you. And he'd laugh. And then when he didn't make the move to Burbank, I'm like, okay. And he's like, just give me 6 months to decompress, and then I promise you I'll talk and I'll tell you anything you want to know. And we've had great conversations since, and I love Will. And Shelley's taste. I love Shelley Bond, and I love Joan Hilty and Michael Siglain. And Steve. I miss Steve in comics. Steve's kicking ass in animation, and I would never want him to, not do whatever he enjoys and stuff. But yeah, Steve, and also Steve touched me in my heart, I should say. He didn't touch me. It's all right, Your Honor. I swear he didn't touch me. But in my sports radio years, he used to listen to me and stuff. He's like, I knew who you were before your podcast. I'm like, oh, that's awesome, man. That's terrific that you knew who I was. So two different worlds.
Yeah, it's funny you say Mike Siglain because he's the Star Wars liaison for us, and he's I only did a little time in the Star Wars universe, but every single Star Wars writer it says like, oh, Siglain is your hero. And he's the person. He was great to me and stuff. So.
That's outstanding. Yeah, we didn't talk about your Star Wars stuff, man. I did. We had enjoyable time.
Yeah. I mean, it's Star Wars is my favorite. I'm one of those people. I don't talk. It's funny because some people are like, oh, I didn't know you were a big Star Wars guy, because I don't talk about it. Star Wars is like very personal to me, and I don't have the same fandom experience that other people have. But like, I when I was 15 years old, I got a Star Wars. My first tattoo is a Star Wars tattoo. Like I, snuck out of the house to get it and all this stuff. Like I own 2 life-size Yodas. I see every Star Wars movie in theaters a dozen times. Like I'm a Star Wars fanatic, and read all the books and all the novels and all the comics and everything. So yeah, I mean, it was a real dream come true. And it's funny because my first Star Wars thing was such a weird one, because it was Mark Paniccia had just left the X office and he'd gone to Star Wars, and I called him to congratulate him, and he was like, oh, and he knew I was such a big X-Men guy that he was like, he sort of was like, well, thanks, but I know you don't mean that. And I was like, no, I do. Like you're running Star Wars now. Like that's right there with X-Men. Like those are the 2 things for me. And he was like, wait, really? He's like, you've never mentioned Star Wars in your life. And I was like, no, I promise you, it's a big thing for me. And I was talking to him about it, and he was like, oh, would you want to do something? And I was like, I literally would do anything. And like a month later, he called me and he was like, what do you think? He's like, what do you know about the original Marvel run of Star Wars? And I was like, everything. Like I have 107 issues. I have them from when I was a kid. I was like, this is the first book I ever collected myself, like saved up money and dug through back issues and went to conventions to get. Like it's an all-time favorite. And he was like, okay, good to know. And then like hung up. And I was like, what is that? Why would he do that? What does that mean? And like 2 weeks passed and he was like, hey, do you want to grab food? And I was like, yes. And I went out and he was like, so we're gonna do another Star Wars comic in that universe. Like we're not allowed to really do not continuity stuff. Lucasfilm doesn't want it. Disney doesn't want it. But we have a special exemption to do Star Wars 108, the 100, what would be the actual final issue of the original run. Would you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, that's a dream come true for me.
Wow.
And then he was like, there's one rule. And he's like, and it's sort of a personal request. He's like, a lot of the people who worked on the original run, like we don't really have relationships with them now, or they're not with us anymore, or, don't want anything to do with this kind of thing. And he's like, but there's someone who worked on the original stuff who we do still have a good relationship with and we really respect. And, he worked on a thing that we want to continue. Would you mind jumping on the phone with Walt Simonson to talk about Star Wars? And I was like, if that was your birthday present to me, that would be one of the all-time great birthday presents. And I was like, yeah, of course. And so like me and Mark and Walt Simonson got on the phone and talked about Star Wars for 2 hours, and it was everything you want it to be. And then I wrote that issue, and it was awesome.
It's funny. My last full-time sports talk job was at Sporting News Radio, and they were very nice, and they would let me use the equipment to record my podcast. And I was 6 months into my podcast. And they downsized. They moved the operation to the West Coast. They didn't keep any of the Chicago employees. And the day I got my notice, I had an interview scheduled with Walt about Star Wars. And I did it. And it was great because literally half my brain is like, all right, how am I going to make money? And the other half is like, this is a dream come true. I'm finally talking to Walt Simonson. Yeah. And we're talking about his time on Star Wars, among other things. And truly, to his credit, he's one of the greatest, nicest guys in comics. He and Louise are just lovely as people. Yeah. And it has been truly one of my great pleasures that I can consider Walt Simonson a guy who isn't sad to see me when I show up at a convention. How you doing, John?
I think I don't remember if I told this story on the podcast with you or at dinner, but it's my sort of Walt. I mean, I'm a huge Walt Simonson fan, but I never met him. And when I was starting and I was self-publishing and stuff, I would go up to my favorite writers and just be like, hey, can I give you a book? And, I'm not asking for feedback or anything. I just want to put books in the hands of people, I really like. And for me, Brian Bendis is the, he's the reason I write comics. Like he's my favorite comic writer, and he's the person who really inspired me to do it. Made me want to do it, write comics. And I gave him a book, and he was just so kind and generous with his time to me, and just so like unbelievably nice. And throughout my career, that's just been a thing, that Brian has just been someone who's been, gone above and beyond. And I think there's a lot of people in comics who that's true for them, that Brian is the guy who is like behind the scenes, just like, oh yeah, Brian really helped you with this, and Brian really did this, and he's just such a hero to me. But I said to him when I got to Marvel and was like in the writer's room and was an exclusive writer, and it was right before he left, and I was I think we were at dinner or drinks, and I said to him, I was like, Brian, you're not going to remember, but like a bunch of years ago I met you, and I gave you my book, and he went, uh-oh. And I was like, no, you gave me so much of your time, and you were so kind. And like, that's one of the two interactions with a professional that I look to as like who I want to be as a creator, is like how I want to act. And Brian sort of smiled, and he said, he's like, you're not thanking me. And I was like, no, I am thanking you. And he was like, no, he's like, that person for me was Walt Simonson when I was coming up. And Walt was the person who was more generous than they had to be by a factor of 1,000. And he said, when I interact with people, I am chasing the ghost of Walt Simonson. Like the kindness that he showed me is what I'm always doing an impression of. And so I'm sitting here saying to Brian, like, I'm always trying to emulate your empathy and your kindness as a creator. And he's saying that it goes to Walt. And it was like such a touching moment for me, because I was like, I love working at Marvel because I love being a part of the tapestry that starts with, Stan and Jack and all of them, and just adding a little stitch here is such an honor. But this was like a personal version of that, of like the way I look up to Brian is the way he looks up to Walt, and I'm sure Walt, if you asked him, has that person, and it goes back and back, and just being part of that lineage is such an honor. And I hope that, if nothing else in my career, I hope in one day that I helped or was kind to a person in some way, that they look up, that they then try and repay that.
Totally, man. Paying it forward. No, I hear you. And I know that Bendis Walt Simonson story as well. And it was great. I was at Baltimore Con back in 2009. Good Lord, 11 years ago. And Walt was just getting started doing Vigilante with Marv Wolfman.
Oh, yeah.
And he brought over pages. And he also brought Judas Coin pages for us to look at. And I just sitting with Brian. And Walt knew who I was because I had talked to him a couple times since then. But he was just so proud of these pages. And Walt walked away, and Brian's like, I can't tell you what it means to me that Walt Simonson gives a shit enough about me to want to show me his pages. And, because what else am I going to say other than, Walter, these are brilliant. They're amazing, well done and stuff. And yeah, it was just, no, I get it, man. I totally get it. And yeah, they're good guys. And also I want to tell you, because when you and I really got to know each other was back at Rose City last year.
Yeah.
Me, you, Charles Soule, and Charles's brother. Hanging out and stuff, having dinner, and then we hung out at the bar, and I was staying with Brian for the convention and stuff. And I got back, and he's like, "What'd you do tonight?" I said, "Oh, it was great." I go, "Charles Soule, his brother, and Matt Rosenberg." He's, Matt's great, and he's just, he's like, "Oh, I'm really glad." He goes, "You got to get him on your show." I'm like, "Yes, I know."
That's great.
Finally, because we'd meet each other a few times at conventions, you and I, and it'd be like, Matthew, I really want you on my show. I hope it would be great. And you're like, oh yeah, man, we'll do it. So yeah, it was like, finally, man, good.
Yeah.
So, and here you are. So this is awesome. Absolutely. Comic Quirks with Jimmy asked, would you ever consider doing a collaboration with Donny Cates? And I want to ask, I'll broaden that in general, as though in terms of like writing with other people. I know you have to sometimes, especially in the X office, and at least be aware and some sort of collaboration. How are you with co-writing?
That's really a question for my co-writers.
But even as sometimes you have to do it, and would you want to do it beyond the necessities of being at a shared universe like Marvel, where sometimes you have to do it?
Yeah. We all do. There's more of every other writer on the page of a Marvel comic than the credits page would let you know. I would say that. So and I co-wrote the X-Men stuff with Kelly and Ed, who are two of my closest friends, and
cool.
And writers I really respect and love. So that makes it easy. As for working with Donny, we did do a project together. We did the Marvel Knights 20th anniversary book.
Oh wow!
His name is big on the masthead, but that was a good 2 weeks of him and me on the phone 8 hours a day, hashing all that stuff out and figuring it out. And there was a point where it was just going to be the two of us writing it, and then we realized that we both had pretty full schedules, and this was a cool opportunity to have some writers that we loved come in who were pretty new at Marvel or weren't at Marvel yet. And so we asked Teeny Howard and Vita Ayala to come in and work on them. And Teeny and Vita are two of the greats and two wonderful people. So I did work on that with Donny. I'd love to work on something with Donny. We talk about it all the time. I was the best man at his wedding.
Wow.
We're very, very good friends, and I think we have very complementary sensibilities. I think we like each other's work a lot, and like the differences and the stuff that we couldn't find, which I think is very good in writing. I'd love to work with something with Donny at some point. We both have pretty full plates right now, but I'm sure at some point we will do something together, just because we are always sort of talking and hanging out and bouncing ideas off each other. I like co-writing. It's very different. I'm actually writing a movie screenplay right now with my brother, who's a screenwriter, director, and he just wanted to do something with me, and I was like, well, I've never written a movie, so let's go for it. So we're doing that, and it's fun. It's weird. It's that comes with years, decades of baggage and whatnot, and but it's been awesome. It's been really cool, and I like it. I know that some people don't, and I sort of like the push and the pull and the low level bickering and the button heads. I think you can get a good product out of wrestling in the mud for it, or you can get a disaster. And I think as long as if it comes out cool, then it was all worth it. If it comes out the disaster side, then you're pretty frustrated and it's a bummer. But and when I started, I had a writing partner, my buddy Patrick Kinlan, who's now writing his own stuff and doing stuff at Aftershock and Vault and Black Mask and a bunch of places. And he's doing awesome books. Maybe he's not doing a book at Vault. I might have just made that up. But he has Aftershock books and Black Mask books, and he's just awesome. And we were always writing stuff together. So yeah, I'm super into that idea.
That's cool. I'm a Larry David kind of collaborator where someone will suggest something like, no, it's a horrible idea, terrible. And then I'll think about it and go, let's go back to that. Wait a minute. There's something there. All right. Because I'll dismiss an idea. And then, like you said, you wrestle in the mud and it's like, actually, all right, no, now I'm getting it. Now it's sinking in. Okay. Yeah. Let's build on that. That's good.
I mean, there's no greater test for storytelling than dropping it in the water and seeing if it floats. And there's no better way to do that than having someone who doesn't think it will. You build your life raft with someone and you jump in it with them and they say it's going to sink and you say it's going to float and you find out one way or the other. And I think that's at its best, I think it works really well. I think in the Uncanny X-Men run I did with Kelly and Ed, I think because we're all such good friends and because we all have different but overlapping sensibilities, there was a little bit of a not trying to step on each other's toes, which ended up having a book that sort of had too many voices in it. There wasn't sort of an authorial tone to it in the same way that I think all three of us, and I don't want to speak for Kelly or Ed, but all three of us, I think, came away with a book that I was like, well, that's not the book I would have written, which can be a good thing or a bad thing.
Agreed.
But I look at my own pages and I'm like, oh, I wish that they were a little different. But then I look at Kelly's and Ed's and I love them. So it's a weird thing. And I don't know what they're feeling on their pages and their art. But I'm like, oh, I wish my pages hit a little harder. I wish these were a little different. But it's not their fault. It's my own fault. And then I love what they did. So it's a weird feeling sometimes.
I understand. And by the way, you are dropping some great names that I am friends with or that I've been meaning to talk to and haven't yet. And I will be getting in touch with certainly Teeny and Ed about doing a couple of these in the weeks to come. And I think, and you'll forgive me because I'll put you on the spot right now, and you'll have to get me in touch with Kelly because I really want to talk to Kelly as well.
For sure.
And haven't had that opportunity to really, get to meet her. And again, this is why I miss the conventions. We all miss the conventions, but it really is a great chance to meet people and get a chance to know them maybe after hours, and then say, hey, come on the show and everything. So
I may be telling tales out of school, and this may mortify them, but I literally talk to Kelly and Ed every single day.
Oh, that's great, man. That's fantastic. No, Ed's fantastic, and man, literally, I forget the name of his murder or his crime books.
Murder Book.
Murder Book. It was Murder Book. Okay, great. Yeah, man, just bowled me over, and I'm just like, oh my god. And I'm so, again, much like yourself, I'm like, I'm so glad that somebody at Marvel is like, oh no, this guy's good. We got to do work with him, and it just everything he's done since. It's no, I love his original ideas, and I love what he's. I mean, well, they are all original ideas, but you know what I mean. Stuff for Marvel and stuff on his own. And Teeny, I'm so happy for Teeny. Yeah, she's great. Seeley introduced me to Teeny, and I've just been such a fan of hers. And I luckily again at C2E2, I did get to see her face to face and just say, keep going, man. You're doing great. And again, you'll forgive me again as an older guy. I'm just like with a lot of you guys being younger and stuff. It's like, oh man, go. It's like because really, it's reassuring to me as an older reader that I can enjoy younger writers and still really get excited about them. And my friend Calvin Reed over at Publishers Weekly has got a good 15 years on me, and he still gets excited about new comics and stuff. And I'm like, oh, Calvin, that's so reassuring that I'll probably have that same passion that you do and everything 10 years down the line. It's gonna make me feel better that I still get excited about this stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's what's fun about comics is if you can't. I mean, everyone enjoy comics the way you want to enjoy them, but I think the idea that you can look back and for decades and be like, I love these people, and then these people took over, and I love this, and I love this, and it's like, well, every generation has those people that you can just fall in love with their work, and that's what's it's a never ending supply of just great voices to fall in love with, to tell stories, and that's such a thrill. And for me, I have a real personal stake, because when I started, I worked at Black Mask when Black Mask started as a publisher, and Matt Pizzolo, who runs Black Mask, is a good friend and a great person. And it was really exciting to be at this publisher where I was looking at all the pitches and reading over pitches and introducing the people, and he's reading everything, and we're meeting, and so many of the writers that I really love right now were coming through those doors at the start, and it's really exciting, because it's Teeny's first creator-owned book was at Black Mask, and Mags Visaggio's first creator-owned books at Black Mask, mine, Patrick Kinlan, just a ton of awesome Tony Patrick and Vida Ayala, just a ton of awesome writers and artists, just coming out of there. And it was really fun to be a part of that when it was happening, and now watching all these people going off and going to Marvel and DC and Image and Dark Horse and Boom and all these places, and just watching these careers explode. It was fun to just be in the room at that moment. Was great.
Are you a guy that talks to do people? I mean, it sounds like, again, the advice that Bendis gave you, and again, we talk about Walt and everything like that. Deanie, dude, I'm of two minds, and I'll do it. I'll post the question. Is there a way to contact you for an interview for a high school club meeting? Because he had Zdarsky in January, and he'd love to have another writer. I mean, if you want, we could broker something, and I can,
Matthew at ashcanpress.com is my email address. I don't care.
There you go.
It's just ashcanpress, ASHCANPRESS. Sure, reach out. I will say, I try and talk to people and do stuff, and always reach out. And if people want advice or have books they want me to read, I'm so flattered and I'm touched. I'm also get a lot of email, and I'm bad at it. I spend so much time looking at my computer that I really relish not looking at my email on my computer. So when people want something from me, I'm going to say this, and this is a stupid thing to say, but whatever, I'm a stupid guy. Don't feel weird if you want me to do your podcast or read your comic, emailing me 3 or 4 times. It's part of the job. I know that it's annoying, and you feel I'm nagging this dude I don't really know. It's fine. You're not nagging me. Just do it. Just bug me if I don't get back to you. I'll try to get back to you. That's not me being I blow people off, but I miss things. So
I hear you, buddy. No, and believe me, I'll get that too, where people read my book. Can I be on the podcast and stuff? And it's, yeah, I'm glad I'm doing it as much as I'm doing it now, because maybe there's a little more room. But I'm the same way. It's no, listen, bug me. I say the same thing. I'm just stay on me. And I go, I'll at the very least, I'm happy to read your comic book and tell you what I think of it and everything. Yeah. So, and please, who the fuck am I at the end of the day? Seriously. Truly, man, I'm just another reader. I'm just another fan.
Yeah, that's that's how I feel about it. Is if someone wants me to read their book, they do the same thing I do. Yeah, that's cool. You're gonna read my book, I'll read your book. Why not? Sure.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm always honored that people want to do that. Someone was making fun of me the other day because they were I was in a bookstore and you have pull quotes on 8 people's books and that came out in 2 months, and I was yeah. People ask me, I think because I'm the dude who will do it. But yeah, I feel honored that people ask me, so I try and do it.
Totally agree, man. Absolutely.
I owe to someone when I get off this. I have to write one.
What are you doing? You got to write a pull quote later?
I have to write a pull quote right after this. Yeah.
Well, and Jimmy, thank you. I really enjoy doing these live streams. It's a byproduct of the lockdown, but I have a feeling it's going to become a regular component with Word Balloon moving forward. And someone that also, as it might have been Jimmy as well, saying, will there be a new Bendis tape soon? Yeah, we've Brian and I have been talking about it. He's got kids, and they're all taking virtual classes, and he's got a full house of kids. So he is really, really busy and has to get up early to be there for school to help the kids with their assignments and stuff like that. It is not simple, and has the true full range of Olivia being high school age, and London, his son, being probably first grade or something like that, I think right now, and several in between. So yeah, it's we'll get there. We will get there. And also, I'm teaching on Mondays for another week at Columbia College. I'm teaching audio production. So Sunday nights aren't the best night either. So it's just finding that right sweet spot. And again, too, I mean, Brian's taking advantage of family time. Everybody's, together, and he's a good father, and I don't want to impede on that. So, there you go for that question. But Matthew, I'll let you go. I mean, good Lord, we've been talking for 2 hours, and Mike Pellerito from Archie, obviously shocked that we're doing this, but
Mike,
good to see Mike.
You look so handsome in that picture.
We know better, Mike. I'm
no,
teasing.
you're always handsome, Mike. But that's a very good. You look like you have a good steely gaze. I like that.
Is there a possible Archie book in your future?
Well, I did Archie Meets the Ramones, and then
I forgot about that. Well done, sir.
And
yes.
Me and Alex Segura. I did that with Alex, co-writing.
Yeah.
And we did Archies, which is 7 issues of the band on tour, which was super fun, and we had a lot of cool guest stars, Blondie and the Monkees and Churches and Talking Heads and just all this cool stuff. And we just did Archie Meets B-52s, which was I will say a lot of the bands we cover are bands that I'm a huge fan of, and I was like, the B-52s are a band that I was never the hugest fan of. Like I love some B-52 songs, but I was never that
shocking.
But it was a getting the band back together to make the book. So I was like, yeah, we got to come back, and I got to go join up with the Archie guys and do this because they're doing it. So that was super fun, and actually spending weeks working on the book and listening to nothing but the B-52s, I was like, oh wait, I do like the B-52s even more than I thought I did. I really enjoy them. So yeah.
Oh man, Love Shack fine, Rome fine. Give Me Back My Man, Legal Tender, all that great early stuff, Private Idaho. It's like, oh man, no.
Private Idaho is one of the all-time great songs. Like that always for me. I was like, Private Idaho is a flawless song. But Give Me Back My Man was the song that I was gonna have. We had a scene where Betty is playing solo show, and she goes to and one of the B-52s is there, and I had her in the scene singing Private Idaho, but then I was like, no, she should be singing Give Me Back My Man, because I kept listening to that over and over, and so that's what she's singing.
That's outstanding. That's fantastic. Have you ever seen, and especially as a guy who used to be in the music business, you ever see Paul Simon's movie One Trick Pony?
No.
Oh, Matthew, you got to see it. It's fantastic, and it really is. It's about a guy who was a one-hit wonder during the Vietnam era and had a song about the Vietnam War. And he's still touring, it's like 10 years later, because it's late 70s when he made this. Late in the evening, that Paul Simon song came from the soundtrack of One Trick Pony. And I think Simon does a credible acting job. He's no Olivier, but he does fine. And it's really all about the music business back in 1979. And it's got a great cast. Lou Reed is in there as a very mainstream producer, ironically, that is going to take Paul Simon's song and just take all the real passion out of it and turn it into something very top 40 kind of sounding stuff. It is so great. And Rip Torn is in it and plays this kind of hard-bitten record executive. I really think you'd love it, and I'd really love for in a future conversation if you do manage to see it.
Next time you have me back, I'll do it. That's my homework.
There you go, buddy. Never homework, man. Absolutely. Matt, as always, man, great conversation. Seriously, man, thank you for taking the time. It honors me that you want to come on and chat with me and stuff. No, it really means a lot.
Thanks for having me, John. It was a blast as always. Super fun talking to you, and thanks for everyone who watched. Who's your next guest?
Tomorrow night. Oh, very good. You see, this is good, Matt. Matt knows how to do this. Tomorrow night, I'm going to do a Word Balloon Live with Scotty Young, and at the end of the week, I'm going to be talking to Vanita Rogers from Newsarama and Heidi McDonald, and getting the comic journalist's point of view of what's been going on and what may be coming, and as the ever-changing comic market evolves. I also talked to Joe Pruitt and had a great aftershock conversation with him that I'll be releasing soon. Lots of neat stuff next week. And yeah, Brian and I, believe me, everybody, we're all trying really hard to find the right time to talk. Kelly Sue DeConnick, we've agreed in principle. She'll be coming up. And yeah, man, like I said, I'll be bugging Ed and Teeny, and I'll be bugging you for Kelly's information. So
awesome. Yeah,
that's great. Everybody, thanks a lot for tuning in. If you came in late, of course, you'll be able to go back and watch it on YouTube or on Facebook. And I will be releasing this as an audio as well. But as always, thanks a lot for listening.